this is something I actually have firsthand knowledge about, and I understand what's going on a little bit, and other people have firsthand knowledge about. So we're just gonna go dive right into this story, and this story is very important because it's a widespread problem in the armed forces. Uh, this girl here basically had to post a video saying that if something happens to her and she's dead, it wasn't because of suicide, and we're gonna go into why she's saying this. If I end up dead, I am not suicidal. Army specialist goes viral for speaking out in the wake of soldier's mysterious death. An Army specialist stationed in Germany says she is afraid of her life after superiors ignored abuse against her and fellow soldiers, according to a TikTok. In a video posted on October 6, a woman says Specialist Thomas in the 21st Theater Sustainment Command station in Germany. Thomas says she thinks the Army is trying to kill her and said, if I end up dead, I am not suicidal. Thomas said she has been telling her family about these abuses and feels scared in the wake of the mysterious death of Denisha Montgomery, another Army soldier stationed in Germany. Thomas said she has been voicing concerns about her treatment to her family, similar to what Montgomery described to her family before her death. So Montgomery, Denisha, was telling her family that she was being abused by her chain of command, right? Now, what kind of abuse it is, it could have been, physical, sexual, mental. We're going to get into this. Montgomery was found dead in August, and the Army official ruled her death as suicide, but the family is disputing the cause of death. Montgomery's family claims she called them before the death and said she had been assaulted by another officer and showed them the bruises on her body. So it's physical abuse. She called her family and said, hey, this officer abused me. Look what he did. The Army said Montgomery suffocated herself, but Montgomery's aunt told news stations she doesn't believe that's true. If she get her own autopsy, you have a right as a family, by the way. You don't have to trust a military autopsy. You can have your own and pay for it and get it done. And if it contradicts what the military is saying, there's a problem. The Army said that Montgomery suffocated, right? But we have taken up upon ourselves to collect all the evidence to show that Denisha was not suicidal, to show that she was attacked and afraid of her life, and to show that she was ready to come back home, she said. While Montgomery's family was told her death was suicide, a recent report released by the Army lists her cause of death as pending. So they told the family it was suicide, but the medical report still said pending, which is also another suspicious. That shouldn't never been conflicted to begin with. So there's already basis for a lie, and there's basis for suspicion, so the family is already on the right track here. But the Army told Kentucky WDRB that there was no indications of foul play or criminal activity. In the video, Thomas said the key to her room had been missing from the master box in their barracks, and that she can't sleep because the anxiety that someone could come home and assault her. So basically, there's a spare key in their barracks. It disappeared from the master box, and she's worried about somebody coming in and assaulting her. It's a legitimate concern. You and your friend just complained. You just went on, told everybody what was going on, and now this is going on. So yeah, there's legitimate concerns here. In a TikTok live on Thursday, Thomas said she saw an assault happen a week before she made her first video, and that it was handled scared her. How it was handled scared her. Part of the reason she spoke out. Thomas' original video over 7 million views and 1.5 million likes. She said 2 update videos since then, right? Thomas had refused to provide any specific videos on her treatment or any specifics of the complaint, saying she doesn't want to get any of that until she gets home. So she's afraid to speak out too much and tell everybody what happened. She wants to be free first, right? Thomas said in the video she was scheduled to fly stateside October 21st, and then on a Thursday, Thomas said command saw her first video and changed her locks, but the Army has pushed her out, and it's easier to get rid of a person than fix it. This is actually true, right? So we can get into the allegations part in this, but basically the Army has a problem. A lot of people don't know. When I was in Iraq, they were laughing about trying to kill me. It wasn't gonna happen, right? I'm not somebody easily killed, and how can I put this? It's because I needed surgery on my arm, so they thought they were gonna abuse me and do all this crazy stuff. But when I got to Iraq, it didn't go their way. I handled things differently. I made sure that I was safe, and I went to Iraq and I rode around all the convoys. I was never even around my chain of command. I did my part, and I did my service proud, right? So soldiers being killed is not nothing new. It's not nothing new for females, especially. And the chain of commands have gone war after war, base after base, unimpeded, and there seems to be zero arrest in these cases. And there's evidence of this, right? So, one of the famous ones was a Fort Hood soldier, Vanessa, right? She was murdered after learning of an alleged killer's affair, court filings revealed. The chilling motive behind the brutal murder of Fort Hood servicewoman had been revealed in a court filing, 20 years old when she was bludgeoned to death with a hammer by her fellow soldier, Aaron Rom, also 20, armory in Fort Hood. So this is stuff that goes on. But when this happened, there was a lot of investigations. They didn't want to, police didn't want to do their job, and it just went all crazy. But for some reason, female soldiers have a high suicide rate compared to their counterparts, right? In the civilian world. I know when I was in Iraq, there was a female soldier who said she got raped. It was another unit. And I was listening to another female soldier telling about this. And she was raped by her company commander. And apparently, she died of a gunshot wound. That's what they said. They ruled it a suicide. People questioned whether it was a suicide or whether he murdered her because he was afraid that she was going to tell. This is nothing that's uncommon. This happens a lot. It shouldn't happen a lot, but it was. Stephanie Shannon was 20 years old when she landed in Saudi Arabia, tan camouflage uniform, still crisped around the edges. She enlisted in the Army in November 1989, motivated by the opportunity for a career, seduced by the promise of learning discipline bravery. Just 9 months after she entered basic training, Iraq leader Saddam Hussein mobilized his force to attempt to invade Kuwait, the oil-rich nation. We all remember that. She took a 33-hour flight to the eastern edge of Saudi Arabia. Work began quickly, and when she landed, Shannon was tasked with trucking munitions across the desert in a battle, fighting the enemy in bushes. So it talks about all the stuff that she did. Complaining and fighting back drew more attention, including intimidating meeting with their superiors, which they accused her of disobeying orders. She couldn't shake the feeling that her sergeant had been throwing her the worst jobs, the worst at times, trying to break her down in retribution. Something that meant that 12-hour shift by herself, which is ongoing. This is actually against. This was a problem when Iraq first broke out with everybody. That this is not cool. This is not something you do by yourself. And there was actually a sergeant major in 2003, right? 2000, the first tour of Iraq. The sergeant major of 2nd 502nd Strike Force was a douchebag. He left the convoy by himself, but the news reported that he lost the convoy. You don't lose your convoy. He was driving around in a white truck. The only people who had these trucks was the army, so every Iraqi knew this was not one of theirs. They only drove Volkswagens and BMWs over there, right? And so he was driving around to bordello houses, having sex with hookers, the Iraqi hookers. Well, he got himself killed and the driver killed. The driver was a temporary driver because his other driver went home for that Thanksgiving trip, right? So he got his driver killed because he wanted to get a little play on the side. Well, he was married, and he was cheating on his wife with his girlfriend back in the States, and he was cheating on both of them with these Iraqi hookers. He didn't care. This is the kind of crap that goes on in the Army. Matter of fact, a sergeant, a friend of mine I went to school with, was a ranger, said he had to mediate between the two of them because they came on base arguing in front of the company who should get what, the girlfriend or the wife. And you had to sit down both of them in a room. So soldiers being killed by the chain of command, nothing new. This is what they wanted. They wanted her to die. They wanted her to go out on a ship by herself. This should have been a no-go from the get-go. Anybody that was an officer should have put a stop to this. But there is no good officers. This is why I get paid PTSD money. A lot of people don't know I get PTSD, VA disability, service connected, not because of the war, because of stuff like this that happens to me and to a lot of other people by the chain of commands. Because if they don't like you, they'll try to kill you. Other times it meant brutal physical labor. In one instance, she was hurt on her back tossing water containers from a truck. Shannon grew angry and wondered why her commanding officer made a 5'3", 150-pound soldier do a job men twice her size had been assigned. Well, that's another argument that a lot of people would say, that's a different story for another topic. Every day somebody's messing with you, it causes wound, and wound you can't heal because you can't talk to trauma, you can't report it. You end up feeling like you're an outcast. That's what happens. I wasn't the only one they tried to outcast, there was quite a few. And matter of fact, when we got back, all the good soldiers got out. Nobody wanted to stay with this chain of command. We had one sergeant in our company, Charlie Company, that one of his soldiers was getting out, didn't want to re-enlist. So what he was trying to do, what the Army tries to do sometimes, is they try to do what they're doing to this girl here. What they would do is they try to hound you, they try to get after you, they try to break you so they can Article 15 you and get you to stay in the Army longer to punish you. That's what he was trying to do. It didn't work. Thank God the soldier got out and he's free from that idiot. But it happens all the time in the Army. That's why I tell people, do not join. Do not join. The biggest fear isn't war, it's what your own chain of command does to you. It'd be 20 years after her, still in the desert, Shannon first learned doctors say words post-traumatic stress, a diagnosis spurred by harassment during endured stress of war and pain. This is most common actually. This is more common than what happens in our war. This kind of PTSD. So, she has a newborn son, interest, social work through time. Let's see, tens of thousands of veterans contemplate what I don't like my mouth on that suicide every year, and VA estimates suggest that 7,000 veterans die from suicide annually, at about 20 people a day. The majority of these deaths are men, with the suicide rate double for male veterans compared to the female parts. So the female part is still very, very high, right? But U.S. military keeping secrets about female soldier suicide? Yeah. So somebody actually did an article about this, with something I was just talking about. And since I posted on April 28th the article, there's an Army cover-up of the rape and murder of women soldiers. The deaths of two more U.S. Army women in Iraq and Afghanistan have been listed as suicides. September 28, 2000, death of 30-year-old Specialist Clara Durkin, and the February 28, 2008, Specialist Keisha Morgan. Both suicides are disputed by the families of the women. Since April 2008, 5 more U.S. military women have died in Iraq. 3 of non-combat related incidents, 9 U.S., 6 British, and 1 Ukrainian military woman, and 13 U.S. female civilians have been killed in Iraq, Kuwait, and Bahrain, as well as probably hundreds of thousands of Iraqi women and girls. Of the 90 military women, 64 are in the Army. She's given a bunch of stuff. That's boring part of this. See here. The deaths of the 14 U.S. military, 13 Army, and 1 Navy woman, and a British military woman served in Iraq, Kuwait, have been classified as suicides. 2 Army women in Iraq, McKinley, victim of vehicle homicide, and Block was shot 5 times by a fellow soldier who then killed himself, and 2 Navy women. So it goes into a long, long story. Then Lavina Johnson, let's see, to discuss the article. So it goes in the whole talk about how the cover-up's going on, how many people. She gives the statistics, and it's sad. Women sexually assaulted before their deaths. That's the main thing here. Is the Army's not doing the detailed investigations. That's what's making a lot of these families mad. Remarkably, a rape test was not performed on the body of Lavina Johnson, although the bruising and accelerations of her genital area indicated an assault. Another family does not believe her daughter committed suicide in Iraq. PFC Tina Priest, 20, of Smithville, Texas, who reported rape by a fellow soldier in 2006 in a military base known as Camp Tajai. Never even heard of that one. Priest was part of the 5th Support Battalion, 1st Brigade Combat Team, 4th Infantry Division from Fort Hood, Texas. The Army said Priest was found dead in a room on March 1st, 2006, and self-inflicted M16, 11 days of the rape. That's the one I was just talking about, actually. That's the one I didn't know the girl's name till now, but that's the one I heard other people talk about quite a few times. Matter of fact, I knew one of the girls that knew her, and firsthand, I was listening to her story on this. Disputes the Army's findings. Ms. Priest said she talked several times with her daughter after the rape, and Tina, while every upset of rape was not suicide, Ms. Priest continues to challenge the Army's 800-page investigation documents with a simple question: how could a 5-foot-tall daughter with corresponding short arm length have held an M16 at an angle which have resulted in a gunshot? So this is before the M4 carbines. This is with the full-length M16s. So not every unit had it. We had M4s, but her unit would have had the M16s. They wouldn't have had the M4s, and they would have had the longer barrel on them, and not the collapsed buttstock. The Army attempted several explanations, but each was debunked by Mrs. Priest, and 800 pages of material approved by the Army itself. The Army now says Tina used her toe to pull the trigger. The weapon killed her. The Army reported never investigating Tina's death as a homicide, only as a suicide. So they went right in as a suicide. They didn't do their proper job. They didn't do the investigation. They didn't collect proper evidence. They didn't talk to any other fellow soldiers. So this is what happens when a cover-up happens, and this is what leads to suspicion when the Army does a piss-poor job. That's what happens. This is a really piss poor job of the United States Army, but this happens all the time. So you can't count on the Army investigation team because their only goal is to save the commander, save the officers. That's the only goal in the Army, is to make the officers look good and everybody else look bad. That's what it is. According to rape charges against a soldier whose sperm was found in Tina's sleeping bag were dropped a few weeks after her death. Well, ain't that convenient? So she complains about the rape, but after her death, it was conveniently dropped. It was convinced a failure to obey an order and sentenced to forfeiture of $700 for 2 months, 30 days restriction to base, 45 extra duty. What the hell? He was convicted of failure to obey an order and forfeiture of $700. He committed rape, and that's what they did? That's sick. On May 11, 2006, 10 days after Tina Priest found dead, 19-year-old Army PFC Durkinson was found dead in the same camp. Durkinson died 3 days after she suffered what the Army called self-inflicted gunshot. The Army claimed that she said to committed suicide in a room where her body is found. Investigators report discovering her diary open to a page where she had written about being raped during training. Unknowingly investigated a date rape drug. Person identified in her diary as a rapist was charged by the Army with rape after her death. Many did not believe that she shot herself, but there's no evidence of homicide. There's never is, right? So, oh man, it can go on and on and on. This is a very long article. So she goes into what I was just talking about. Is the Army really that incompetent, or are they just into deception and lying and cover-ups? It is now well known that there was deception by the U.S. military in a friendly fire death of Pat Tillman, who decision to make a heroic character out of PFC Lynch. I don't like Jessica Lynch personally because she lied. A lot of people don't know what happened. If you don't know the story, Jessica Lynch, just to say this. She was on a convoy. Her unit was not well disciplined. They didn't oil their guns. They didn't clean their guns. So when they got attacked, they couldn't fire their weapons. Well, when they heard about her, there's all kinds of horrible stories. I'll just cut to the chase. When she was recovered, per se, right? She said that she fired a weapon until she ran out of ammo and she was trying to make herself look like a hero and she was raped. But it turned out she was never raped. She lied about being raped. She never fired a weapon because the MPs actually recovered all their weapons from the convoy and recovered all the convoy stuff. So when a unit of an MPs went in and recovered it, they found that most of the weapons couldn't even be fired, and there was not a lot of firing. They just, died. But she thought she was the only survivor. Well, it turned out there was a couple others, including a black woman who was beaten, who was raped, because she wasn't purdy like Jessica Lynch. She didn't get the news. So George Bush goes around. He parades Jessica Lynch like she's his greatest thing ever. Meanwhile, all the other male soldiers who were being bombarded, shot that day, we didn't get nothing, right? So Jessica Lynch gets lied. She gets all kinds of awards. The one black girl that did get raped and beaten didn't get a damn thing. And this is what happens. So, but there's many other cases of deception. So Pat Tillman was another case. He was actually the Arizona Cardinal. NFL football player, decided to join the Army. Well, a lot of you don't know, but he was shot by his own people, what they call friendly fire. There's friendly fire, then there's your whole damn squad firing at you. That's a little bit different. So Pat Tillman was murdered by his own people, by his own Rangers. The decision to make a heroic character out of PFC Lynch was really sick. Another case of deception. After much pressure from the families and deaths of their sons, parents, Army Specialist McCaffrey, first Andrew Tyson, were finally told about the 2 years of death of their sons that they were not killed by insurgents by Iraqi Army recruits whom were trained in patrolling. That happens a lot, right? So we'll get into a few other things because I'm already starting to get angry. So yeah, soldiers' families do deserve better. Pat Tillman deserved it better by his own people. He was a Ranger, for crying out. He was elite. He got murdered by his own people. Jessica Lynch lies, gets paraded around. Meanwhile, people from her same unit didn't get anything. That's how sick the Army really is. So, suicide rates triple for female soldiers when they go to Iraq and Afghanistan, right? It's a shame, but some of that ain't suicides. We just went into that. Some of it's murders. Now, if anybody knows me, I'm all for one standard. I'm for the male standard of the higher PT test. I believe if you want to be in the Army as a female, you need to pass the same test. I don't believe in two different standards. That way you have one unity, one uniformity. And, that's my opinion aside. But I think war is just hell on a lot of people, and the suicide rate does go a little bit heck. But the chain of commands are also at fault for a lot of these suicides. Like I said, it's not really war related. It's how the chain of command treats people, and it goes above and beyond the army of how they should be treating people because it's making it personal. It's not about training. It's not about making somebody disciplined. It's not about making them a better soldier. It's about a company commander or high-ranking NCO's ego and what kind of abuse he can. It's kind of like, I'll get into that in a minute, right? So the rate goes up, and it talks about the rates and everything. You can read that article yourself. And see, the one I want to get into is death of Lavina Johnson, right? The daughter, the death and controversy. Johnson's death was officially ruled suicide by the Department of Defense. However, her father became suspicious when she saw her body in a funeral home and decided to investigate. Initially, the Army refused to release the information, but did so under Freedom of Information Act, requested by the congressman hearings, right? The autopsy report that photographs revealed Johnson had a broken nose, a black eye, loose teeth, burns from a corrosive chemical on her genitals, and a gunshot wound to her mouth. But they rated it suicide. Basically, what they're saying is somebody poured acid on her to hide the DNA evidence and beat the hell out of her. The Army's like, yeah, it was a suicide. She must have beat herself and threw the acid on her. This is the all common problem, right? And I'll let you read this yourself. I'll go through this. But I tell everybody all the time, don't ever join the Army. The Army will change you. It'll mess you up. Most of the people in the Army that get a higher chain of command, they're not really good people. They messed up their own